Hi there, I'm Jerry Foster. This is the southern edge of the Galera Mountains in southeastern Arizona, and it is some of the ruggedest and most unforgiving mountains in the state. They've been the scenes of tragedies from Old West shootouts to fatal airplane crashes. Some of those victims died in 1950 when their Air Force bomber plunged into this very spot. But there were survivors.
And then I saw, through my left eye, I saw some flames or light coming from around the turret.
I heard the pilot, almost immediately, he said, this is it, bail out, bail out, bail out.
He died young, and when people die young, a lot of people take notice.
That flight is not only part of Arizona's history, but American and military history as well. Tonight we're going to tell you their story as the survivors remember the last flight of 46040. The late 1940s. The big war was over and America was on the move. Big, brash, shiny, and new, everyone was rushing, trying to make up for lost time. The Army Air Corps became the Air Force in 1947. But now, we were a country at peace, and that translated to less money, even for a new program started a year before called SAC, Strategic Air Command.
There was a real big cutback in the Defense Department in 1949, so we were really operating a lot on a shoestring at that time. So it took a lot of loyalty and dedication and sacrifice on the part of all the people that were helping build SAC at that time.
The idea behind SAC was simple, to always be prepared, ready at any moment to both defend and, if necessary, to attack. This new unit included weapons whose awesome power had only been used twice before, in August of 1945.
There was certainly a lot of effort and time and money spent on SAC because it was pretty much the first nuclear delivery force. So we did have a lot of priority, and we had a lot of top people and good people we had to have.
Many of those good people were part of the 43rd Bomb Wing at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Tucson, Arizona. Because of always being on call, knowing they could at any moment be sent on dangerous missions, there was a great deal of pressure on the men and their families.
We felt a lot of pressure, but however, I think most of us in SAC felt that the job we were doing was worth all the trouble that we went through.
Patience, strength, love, and devotion, because you soon learn to love that SAC base as much as your man does.
While many of the SAC men, still in their 20s, were World War II veterans, some were new to military and kids fresh out of high school. Kids like James T. Adcock, known to his family as T.
He had a friend that they knew they wouldn't have to go in service, so they went in on a dare. Really, that's how they decided to go at a certain time.
The bunch of seasoned veterans and fresh-faced newcomers became bands of brothers, joined by their pilot and aircraft commander. The camaraderie was close.
And this crew in particular, I don't know about some of the other crews. Each crew's different. But Dutch Lautenschlager, the pilot, maintained that his crew was going to be close, and it was close.
I was responsible, of course, ultimately for the success or failure of the missions and the training of the crew. And so I had to feel I really take that attitude and get the job done.
To do their job, they needed to replace the old bombers left over from the war that were still in the Air Force fleet. The last propeller-driven bomber delivered to the United States Air Force was the Boeing B-50. But in 1949, the Super Fortress really proved itself. A B-50 from Davis-Monthan Air Force Base flew around the world non-stop thanks to aerial refueling. B-50s would later see duty as tankers and as planes that launched the rocket experimental aircraft, the little ships that first broke the sound barrier. But as bombers, the B-50 had a bad reputation outside of SAC for high accident rates and not many survivors.
See, we'd had these airplanes for nearly 2 years, and we didn't have a lot of problem with it at first until we started getting a lot of time on them.
For the time and the place, there was an awful improvement over the B-29 as far as operations. But we were sort of testing them.
July 12th, 1950. The Korean War was barely 3 weeks old. The word went out that afternoon that a maximum effort was in effect, a major training operation. Flight 46040 took off that afternoon from Tucson on a classified mission. They had to turn around over New Mexico because of carburetor problems with the number 3 engine. The flight returned to Davis-Monthan for repairs, and that would take several hours. Like other missions flown by SAC crews, this one was considered classified and one of high security.
The wing was running what we call profile missions, which is very similar to what you would use for nuclear deliveries.
We had targets all laid out, and supposedly they were targets that were similar in a lot of ways to certain of the Russian targets that we might have been called on.
It was supposed to be just another mission, but not all the crew members felt that way. Marcelina Daniel told another SAC wife what her husband did that July afternoon as he told her goodbye.
She said, Bob stopped at the door and said, "Oh, wait a minute, Marceline," and he took his billfold out and gave her all the money that was in his wallet. He carried the money. She never had any, maybe a couple of dollars like that. And that was all the money they had between themselves and payday. So what possessed him to do that, we don't know.
Did you ever think that maybe Earl wouldn't come back?
Every time he took off.
Another crewman on that flight was young T. Adcock. Before taking off, he called Peg his wife of 19 months. He told her he just wanted her to know that he loved her. He'd never called her prior to a mission before. But finally, around midnight, the crew headed out for their ship. The serial number was 46040, but the men in the wing just called it by the last 3 numbers, and this would be the last flight of 040.